Hello, I'm continuing and concluding my reviews on the Godzilla series with Shin Godzilla. Now, this wasn't the final Godzilla film, there were 4 more after this, but I already reviewed the Godzilla movies that came after this last year, and I'll leave links to the reviews I did on the Godzilla films that came after this one in the description below. Now, I actually did review this movie a number of years ago, and I decided to leave my old review up. However, it's no longer public. It's now marked as unlisted, but I'll leave a link in the description below to where you can check out my old Shin Godzilla review. Now, Shin Godzilla came out in 2016, and this is a reboot of the Godzilla franchise, coming off the heels of the 2014 American Godzilla reboot. Now, this is the 31st film in the Godzilla franchise. However, if you don't count the 1998 American version from Roland Emmerich, or the 2014 American Godzilla, then this is the 29th Godzilla film. Now, Shin Godzilla was written and co-directed by Hideaki Anno, who is perhaps most famous for creating the anime series Neon Genesis Evangelion. The film was also co-directed by Shinji Higuchi, and yes, I know I probably butchered both of their names, but he also directed a 2008 remake of Akira Kurosawa's The Hidden Fortress. He also directed the live-action adaptation of Attack on Titan, and he did the special effects for the 90s Gamera series, and he was also the assistant effects director for 1984's The Return of Godzilla. Now, despite being pretty polarizing here in the States, in Japan, this film was a freaking blockbuster. I think this was the second highest grossing Japanese film of that year, and I think this was also the highest grossing Japanese Godzilla film since the 90s series. This movie also won Best Picture at what is the Japanese equivalent of the Academy Awards. Now, Shin Godzilla is probably the darkest and most political Godzilla movie since The Return of Godzilla, but in some ways this movie is more true to the themes of the original 1954 film than just about any other Godzilla movie that came in between. The original Godzilla was very much making a political statement about the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki at the end of World War II, and about nuclear testing in general. And in that film, the destruction that Godzilla brings to Tokyo is very much a metaphor for the atomic bombings, and to a lesser extent a metaphor for the fire bombings of Tokyo during World War II. And that film came out less than 10 years after the war, and probably struck a real chord with Japanese audiences at the time. This movie is very much reflecting the earthquake and tsunami that devastated Japan in March of 2011 and led to the Fukushima nuclear disaster, which is considered to be the worst nuclear meltdown since Chernobyl. And this movie very much satirizes the Japanese government's response to that disaster, while also critiquing Japan's submissive relationship with the United States ever since the end of World War II. And I think that might be why this film was such a big hit in Japan, because the film was reflecting some recent national tragedies that they suffered, and kind of like the original Godzilla, this movie I feel like was almost a way for Japanese audiences to cope with what happened. Now, while Shin Godzilla is probably more true to the spirit of the 1954 film than just about any other Godzilla movie that came in between, this is also probably the most unique take on Godzilla since GMK. Actually, even more so than that movie, because this is a radically different take on Godzilla than we're used to, because this movie, being in its own continuity, completely changes Godzilla's origin and completely changes what Godzilla is. In the original film, and in pretty much all the other Godzilla movies, Godzilla is a giant mutated dinosaur, but in this film, Godzilla isn't a dinosaur at all. Rather, he's these aquatic organisms that have been mutated by nuclear waste, and they merge together into a giant creature sort of in the shape of a dinosaur, but throughout the film you realize that this creature is constantly mutating and evolving. So, in that sense, I can almost understand why this movie turned off so many Godzilla fans in the West, because for one, it is not hard to piss off a Godzilla fan, and I say that as a Godzilla fan, but once again, this is also such a unique and different take on Godzilla than we're used to. Now, personally, I loved this movie, but I could also understand why this movie did not appeal to everybody. But what I loved about this movie, and it's what I love about the original Godzilla, this is more than just a monster movie. This is very much a movie with a political agenda. And the film is so many things in one. It's a political drama and a political satire. It's a black comedy. It's a horror film. It's a thought-provoking science fiction film. And it is a really good Godzilla film in general, even though it is such a different take on Godzilla. Now, the plot of Shin Godzilla is a giant creature appears in Tokyo Bay, completely baffling the Japanese government. Now, this creature, which is later revealed to be the product of nuclear waste, makes landfall in Tokyo and devastates parts of the city, and it's later revealed that this creature can shoot atomic radiation out of its body. Now, this creature, which is later named Godzilla or Gojira, is a threat not just to Japan, but possibly to all life on Earth as we know it. Now, believing that Godzilla could also be a threat to America, the United States government wants to drop an atomic bomb on Tokyo, which they believe will destroy the creature once and for all. So, in the film, a team of outcasts and misfits working on the fringes of the Japanese government must race against time to try to figure out a way to permanently stop Godzilla before history's third nuke is dropped on Japan. Now, I really do think that Shin Godzilla, more than any other Godzilla film, is a movie made with a Japanese audience in mind. And I do think a lot of the satire in this film might go over most Americans' heads. Now, I'm not going to pretend I understood all the satirical stuff in this movie, even though I liked most of the satire in the film. Since I'm not from Japan myself, I can't say how accurate or inaccurate the satire in this film actually is. Obviously, I got that it's meant to be a critique of how the Japanese government responded to the Fukushima nuclear meltdown, but again, since I'm not actually Japanese, I can't really speak to how accurate the satire is. But being that this movie came out only a few years after Japan suffered one of the worst natural disasters in recent history, you can see how this film really did strike a chord with the Japanese audience, especially because the whole Fukushima nuclear meltdown is something that Japan is still dealing with today. And there are so many scenes in this movie that frighteningly reflect the 3/11 earthquake and tsunami, especially when Godzilla first makes landfall, and also in the film you realize that Godzilla is just leaking radiation everywhere and the contamination zone is just growing and growing. And again, I think that would be frighteningly familiar to people living in Japan. The film opens up almost as a found footage movie where, like, you see news footage of Godzilla's first appearance, and you also see footage that people took on their camera phones, and it gives the film a sense of realism that we haven't seen in this series since Godzilla 1984. You also get camera footage of people fucking around in a tunnel that's being evacuated, and this is before anybody realizes that any real emergency is happening. Now, the film obviously touches on these themes of the implications of nuclear power, but the film is also very much about Japan's place in the modern world. And it's also this whole idea that Japan is still kind of living in the shadow of World War II, and this whole idea that Japan has had to rely on the United States for everything ever since the occupation, and the film's kind of asking, should Japan still suffer for what they did during the Second World War? And should the United States still be this big brother figure to Japan? And that's what the film is very much criticizing. And I thought it was interesting how in the film, when the United States decides that they're going to drop bombs on Tokyo to try to kill Godzilla, Japan really doesn't have a say in it. Now, while the film is definitely satirizing America, or particularly the American government, by no means do I think the film is anti-American. Because by the end of the film, it is with the United States' help, as well as the help of other countries, that the Japanese are able to defeat Godzilla. And while it is a dark movie, somehow the film manages to not be nihilistic, because by the end of the film there is actually a pretty uplifting message about what can happen if we work together in times of crisis. But even though the film does have a quote-unquote happy ending, there is still an underlying darkness, because they do stop Godzilla at the end of the movie, but you're not sure if they permanently stopped him. It's this whole idea that Japan is going to have to learn to live with Godzilla, just like how in real life we as a race have to live with nuclear power. Now, despite the film's dark themes, this is also a very funny film as well, but a lot of the humor in the film comes from how these politicians react to Godzilla in the beginning of the film, but also a lot of the humor comes from just how the film is really making fun of Japanese bureaucracy. Now again, I can't speak to how accurate this is to how things actually work in the Japanese government, but like, in the beginning of the film, you see all these cabinet members, like, constantly change meeting rooms, all in the same scene, and seemingly for no reason. Or like when Japan's self-defense force is awaiting orders from the Prime Minister, like, you have one character tell another character what to tell the Prime Minister, meanwhile they're all in the same room. A lot of the humor and the horror in the film comes from just how unprepared these politicians are for this situation. And one of the funniest scenes in this movie is when the Prime Minister is on live television and he says, "Oh, there's no chance that this creature is going to make landfall," and then somebody comes up to the podium on live television telling him that it has made landfall, and he's like, "It has?" Now, Shin Godzilla has a large ensemble cast of characters, and after watching the movie a few times, I actually have grown to really like these characters, but the issue is there's so many of them, and you don't really get a lot of time to latch on to any one particular character. Like, there's not really a lot of character development in the movie. But I did hear that that was kind of done on purpose as a way to have the characters in the movie sort of represent Japan as a whole. The closest character in this movie to a protagonist would probably be the character of Rando Yaguchi, played by Hiroki Hasegawa. In the film, he's an ambitious young cabinet secretary who's slowly making his way up the political ladder. Now, despite not getting to know this character that well, there is a really interesting moment after some major members of the Japanese government are killed where he's walking, and you can tell that this guy is just on the verge of breaking down. Like, the actor really does sell the stress and horror that this character would be going through. Now, if I had to pick a character who would count as a secondary protagonist, it would be the character of Kyoko Ann Patterson, played by Satomi Ishihara. Now, the character of Kyoko Ann Patterson is a Japanese-American woman sent in as a representative of the United States. Now, she is a good character, and this character has actually become kind of a fan favorite. The issue is, again, this is a woman of Japanese descent who was apparently born and raised in the United States, and there are scenes in the movie where she speaks English, yet it's so painfully obvious that English is not the first language of the actress. But I only noticed that as an American watching the movie. A Japanese-speaking person is probably not going to notice that at all. And as I said before, I really do think this movie, more than any other Godzilla movie, really was made specifically with a Japanese audience in mind. Now, this character does go through an interesting arc where she starts off the film as an intelligent but definitely spoiled and arrogant person, and she doesn't really appreciate her Japanese heritage, but she comes to appreciate it throughout the course of the film, especially after finding out that her government is planning on dropping an atomic bomb on Tokyo. And even when the United States government orders her to evacuate Japan, you know that she's not going to do it. Now, Akira Emoto and Jun Kunimura, both of whom were in Godzilla movies prior to this, both have small roles in the film. But oddly enough, the most interesting character in this movie is a character who never actually appears in the film, and that is Goro Maki, a scientist who apparently killed himself right before the events of the film, and apparently he foresaw the coming of Godzilla, and he was the one who came up with the name Godzilla, which in this film's universe means God incarnate. And it's interesting because you get this vague implication that Goro Maki might have somehow created Godzilla as a way to test Japan and test the human race as a whole. There's also the implication that Goro Maki might have somehow become part of Godzilla, and that definitely ties in with the last shot of the film. Now, it's worth noting that this character has the same name as one of the main characters of The Return of Godzilla. Now, perhaps the film's most controversial element is Godzilla himself. This is a much different take on Godzilla than what we're used to. And what I thought was really interesting was how Godzilla has different forms throughout the movie. Like, he goes through different stages. When you first see him, all you see is his tail coming up out of the water, but when he makes landfall, he basically looks like a giant skinned eel, but with legs. I remember when I saw this movie in the theaters, because the film had a limited theatrical run here in the States. When it got to the scene where you see Godzilla in this form, I remember some guy a few rows behind me just shouted, "Oh my god, what the hell is that?" I also took my younger sister to see this movie. She was 12 at the time this came out, and ever since she was 5 years old, I have gotten her into Godzilla. But she's always preferred the movies where Godzilla's fighting another monster, and when we saw Godzilla in this form, she didn't realize that that was supposed to be Godzilla, and I just remember her saying, "See, he does fight another monster in this movie," and I'm like, "No, I'm sorry, I'm pretty sure that's supposed to be Godzilla." But then you see Godzilla take on his main form in the film, and I gotta say, Godzilla in this movie looks fucking horrifying. He looks like if Junji Ito designed Godzilla. A lot of people complained about Godzilla's eyes in the movie, but honestly his eyes were one of the creepiest aspects because there's something kind of uncanny about Godzilla's eyes in this film. Like, they're so lifeless, like you almost get the sense that this isn't properly a creature, rather this is something else entirely pretending to be a creature. I also think it's really interesting how the form that Godzilla takes in this movie is not even his final form. One character even suggests that he might be able to grow wings. Also, when Godzilla shoots out his atomic breath in this movie, his bottom jaws actually open up, and his atomic breath is more of a laser beam in this film. It also can come out of his tail and come out of his dorsal fins as well. Again, this is not the Godzilla we're used to, which I was perfectly fine with for this movie, because this film is in its own continuity. This is its own unique take on the Godzilla mythos. There are also some beautiful shots of Godzilla that really show the sheer size and magnitude of this creature. Like, there's one shot of Godzilla's tail going over a street. Now, in the film, Godzilla is done with CGI and motion capture, but honestly, some of the CGI is so well done that I was actually shocked it was CGI. Some of it I actually thought was practical, like I actually thought they used a guy in a suit for some scenes. But yeah, Shin Godzilla is a great movie. Not just a great Godzilla movie, but a great movie in general. But I can understand why some people wouldn't like this. Like, it's not a movie for everybody, but this is the kind of Godzilla movie that I've been wanting to see for a while now. Something that really does harken back to the original film. The one thing about this, now I watched this in Japanese with the English subtitles. The issue is, there's some rapid-fire dialogue in this movie, so you have to read the subtitles really quickly, and there's a lot of dialogue in this film as well, so that's a lot of subtitles to read. Now, while I certainly don't mind reading subtitles, it can be very taxing. Now I want to cut to my friend Christian Feliciano giving his thoughts on this movie. When it cuts back to me, I'm gonna be talking about the movie's ending, particularly the final shot, and talk about some of the theories surrounding the ending. And then after that, I'm gonna give a few words on the Godzilla movies that came after this one.
Shin Godzilla is a very interesting film because of the fact that it comes right after the 2014 Godzilla film, and that itself is a reboot of the 1950s Godzilla film. And then Shin Godzilla comes along, and it also is a reboot of the 1950s film. And my initial reaction when I heard that it was coming out was, oh my god, again? You know, and it's not just because it's Godzilla. Don't get me wrong. I say that about every single superhero, monster film, whatever it is. Whenever they go back to do a reboot or an origin story all over again, like the upcoming The Batman film, which is supposed to be another, reboot of Batman. It's like, come on, why can't we just get a story in the middle of this character's career, the middle of this character's life, instead of doing another origin story? I'm so sick of origin stories to the point where I don't even care about origin stories. If somebody just comes out with a new superhero today and never tells me the origin story, I'd be so happy with that. I don't even care. I don't ever want to see the origin story. It's part of the reason why I love John Wick. John Wick pretty much doesn't go into his origin. It just, you're just seeing John Wick and he's just doing what he needs to do. And I love that about John Wick, but this isn't a John Wick review, so let me just get off of that. So going into it, I was like, oh, I'm not going to like Shin Godzilla. This is going to be stupid. But it actually is really good. It reminds me of the 2014 Godzilla film where I was like, I don't know. But then I watched it. I'm like, oh no, I love this film. Well, the same thing here. I went into it. I'm like, oh wow, I really like this. I like to see how they put a modern spin on the original Godzilla film. It's Godzilla again. He's attacking Japan and they have to stop him. And the characters are great. They do a great job in this film. All the actors are fantastic. Graphics are fantastic. Yes, it's not as great as an American film. I get it because the budget in Japan when it comes to live action films is not as high as it is over here. But that does not bother me at all. I am completely fine with, you could put a puppet on the screen and tell me that's a creature, or even a man in a suit like in the original film, and tell me that that's a monster. And as long as the film is good, as long as the acting is good, as long as the characters in the film believe that that's a real monster, and as long as they tell me a great story, I'm cool with it. I don't care. So Shin Godzilla has great graphics to me. I think it's fantastic. I think what they were able to do is great. I know that it won Best Picture, and I believe it won Best Director in Japan, and I think it's well deserved. It's a great film, great story. It's pretty much the same thing as the original. A modern take, like I said, it is more modern. It's trying to see what Godzilla would do in our world, just like the 2014 reboot film. And I like to see how it gets reinterpreted because of the fact that Godzilla in the beginning was a metaphor for nuclear war, and now you could kind of see him as a metaphor for natural disaster, climate change, war, whatever you want to put into Godzilla. That is what he is, and I love that they were able to do that greatly. The one thing that really confuses me in this film, and maybe I'm stupid, I don't know, I've seen it a couple of times, so maybe I just need to watch it more, but there is a shot, and I'm not going to spoil anything, but there is a shot at the end of this film that has me completely baffled. I have no freaking idea what the hell it means. I just watched the film and I went, what the hell is that? I was completely confused. I don't know where that came from. I don't understand it. And it has to do with the new design of Godzilla. If you watch the Shin Godzilla film, if you just see the trailer, you're going to notice that Godzilla this time has a giant tail. That's all I'm going to say. He has a giant tail. Really big. I mean, way bigger, I think, than the original. And yeah, I was just really confused about what happens at the ending of this film. I just had no idea what to do. But that didn't take away from anything. I still enjoy the film greatly. I think that it was great to see another, story of Godzilla. I really wish they would kind of get off the, this new monsters coming to attack us thing. I just really wish that would stop altogether and we just go into the middle of this creature's life and just have another story of Godzilla. The same thing with the American reboots. I wish that they would just stop with that. But that's just me in general. I just wish all superheroes, monster films, horror films, everything would just stop with the whole rebooting the whole thing, and now, this new monster is attacking. Like, just please, I'm just done with it. I want to just see another story with these creatures if you're going to do them. I'd rather new creatures, but okay, fine. We got the same old creatures, so fine. I want to see something new and not just a reboot. But, like I said, great film. Shin Godzilla, highly recommend everybody see it. Check it out. It's fantastic. It's really good. Subtitles, obviously, because I don't speak Japanese, so I watch it with subtitles. You might have to too, if you don't speak Japanese. So if that doesn't bother you, you're gonna enjoy this. If you get bothered by subtitles, I don't know how to help you. So yeah, I really enjoy the film. Highly recommend it. And yeah, thank you so much. Bye bye.
I hope you enjoyed Christian's take on this movie. Now I want to discuss the final shot of the film. So if you haven't seen this movie already, this is a massive spoiler. But basically, at the end of the movie, they manage to freeze Godzilla, and then you get a shot of Godzilla's tail, and you see what look like people in his tail. Now, this of course has sparked a lot of speculation, a lot of analysis, and a lot of fan theories, and I've heard everything from these are supposed to be Godzilla's offspring to these are supposed to be the tortured souls of Godzilla's victims, like perhaps Godzilla in this movie actually is a god in the supernatural sense. But the most commonly accepted theory is that this is the beginning of Godzilla's final form, that essentially Godzilla was going to evolve into a new race of Godzilla-human hybrids. But I think Anno definitely wanted it to be ambiguous, wanted it to be left to the viewer's interpretation. But I think more than anything, the final shot of the film is supposed to be symbolic. Now, I've heard a few people say that it's meant to represent the Tower of Babel. And what is that story but a story of man's arrogance, of man thinking that he can conquer the heavens? And Godzilla has always been a representation of atomic power. Is atomic power not the ultimate example and consequence of man's scientific hubris? But also throughout the film, they constantly say that Godzilla is a god incarnate, and if we go with the theory that Godzilla is essentially birthing a new race of beings, essentially Godzilla is like God in this movie. Godzilla is the creator of a new race, of a new species. Now, instead of following this up with a sequel, Toho followed this up with a trilogy of anime Godzilla films. Now, the Anime Trilogy is almost as contentious among Godzilla fans as the 1998 Godzilla. And to say that series is polarizing would be an understatement. Now, I'm kind of two minds of the Anime Trilogy. On one level, I do think it was kind of a failure, but on another level, I do think there were a lot of really interesting risks and experiments done with the whole Godzilla mythos. In that sense, I think the Anime Trilogy very much took a page from Shin Godzilla's book. Now, I've already reviewed the Anime Trilogy last year, which is why I'm not reviewing them for this particular series of Godzilla reviews. Now, to quickly recap my thoughts on the Anime Trilogy, the first one, Planet of the Monsters, sucked. The second one, City on the Edge of Battle, was a little bit better, but my biggest issue with that one is they kept teasing Mechagodzilla, and they never followed through with it. But the third one, The Planet Eater, I actually really liked The Planet Eater. Unfortunately, you have to sit through the first two in order to get to that one, but The Planet Eater I actually do kind of recommend, and it also had a really unique and also very Lovecraftian take on King Ghidorah. Now, aside from what Toho is doing, you also have the American Godzilla series from Legendary Pictures, the Monsterverse, which so far you have the 2014 Godzilla, Kong Skull Island, which even though that's a King Kong movie, it's still very much in the same universe as the 2014 Godzilla film, and then you had Godzilla King of the Monsters in 2019. Now, I already reviewed Godzilla King of the Monsters last year, and I'll leave a link to that review in the description below. And then hopefully sometime next year you'll have the American remake of King Kong vs. Godzilla. Now, Toho has said that they were going to follow this up with a direct sequel after Legendary is done with their Godzilla series, but they have since scrapped that idea in favor of essentially a Godzilla cinematic universe. Like, basically they want to do a new Godzilla series that's very much inspired by the Marvel Cinematic Universe, kind of like how the Legendary series is very much inspired by the Marvel Cinematic Universe, so I'm guessing they're gonna have a lot of spin-off movies and stuff like that. But in a way, I'm kind of glad that they scrapped the idea of a direct sequel to this, because even though the ending offers limitless potential for a sequel, I also feel a sequel would ruin the ambiguous ending, and I feel like this really should remain a standalone Godzilla film. But yeah, that was my review on Shin Godzilla, and holy shit!